Welcome to Hence the Future podcast. I'm Mattimore Cronin,
I'm Aaron Weber.
and today we're discussing the future of comedy. For our listeners, Aaron is a stand-up comedian. He's also the host of a comedy podcast called Somebody Stop Me, and he's headlining at Zany's Comedy Club in Nashville on September 30th. Aaron, thanks for coming on the pod.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So I wanted to talk to you today about what it's like to be a comedian in the year 2020, what makes a joke funny, the perils of cancel culture, the value that comedy brings to society, and how comedy is likely to evolve in the future. So perhaps a good place for us to start would be, tell us your process for coming up with jokes and how you see the art and science of joke telling.
Wow. Everybody's process for writing jokes is different, and I hesitate to even call what I do a process because there's no real science behind it. Most of my jokes start with either something that bothers me or an insecurity about myself, and then everything else kind of stems from that. Like one of my biggest insecurities is about cars. I know nothing about how to fix cars. And I think something like truly emasculating about not knowing how to change a tire or replace a battery or
I'm the same way. Maria's like the handy person in our household.
yeah, it feels weird, doesn't it? It's something
Yeah.
like I don't know. Every time I go to a mechanic, like I hate that experience of like another man like showing me how to, you know. So like I got a huge chunk of my act that's about specifically that. So like if you know about cars, you can laugh at my expense, or if you don't know about cars like you can relate to what I'm saying. So
Right.
that's where the jokes come from, either an insecurity about myself or something that bothers me, and then it all kind of goes from there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, your podcast and a lot of, I've seen your stand up as well. It's very relatable. And, that's sort of one of there's these six dimensions of humor that Scott Adams, the Dilbert comic strip writer, talks about. And one of them is that relatability. There's also the other six are, so there's naughty, which is, sex jokes, masturbation, dick jokes, all that kind of stuff, potty humor.
Yeah.
There's clever, which is like puns and just sort of interesting takes on society. There's cute, which maybe that would be like, Calvin and Hobbes, like, or like Snoopy or something like that. There's bizarre, which is just like something you wouldn't normally expect, like, like an oiled up, like buff Bernie Sanders or something
Yeah.
like that. Or like the Doge, that like dog, like all buffed up, those memes.
Yes.
Um, and then there's also mean, which is, like Anthony Jeselnik has kind of like mastered the art of being mean, and you laugh because you're kind of uncomfortable. So yeah, I mean, he's kind of put that framework. Does that resonate with you?
I think so. I think the more like for me, um, I those breakdowns don't real. I mean, I don't really think about those anymore.
Hmm.
I'm reminded of that scene from Dead Poets Society where Robin Williams asked the class to read about the definition of poetry at the beginning of the book, and then he has the whole class rip the page. And there is some value in kind of analyzing comedy at that level, but I think at a certain point it's like something's funny or something's not funny,
Hmm.
and and sometimes it doesn't make sense to dig much deeper than that. That might be a dumb
Totally.
answer, just kind of where I'm at.
No, yeah, I mean, there's a quote. E.B. White says, "quote Analyzing humor is like dissecting a frog. Few people are interested, and the frog dies of it."
Yes, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a great quote.
Yeah, I mean, comedy is interesting because, if you ask someone 10 years ago, would being a comedian be a good career path? A lot of people would say no, like, oh, you're better off being like a lawyer or like whatever else. But when
Yeah.
you look forward into like the far future of automation and so many of just the logistical jobs that people have being automated, I've heard some people remark that comedy is going to truly be the last realm of human achieve, like, something that humans are better than machines at. Because, would you ever go to like a comedy show and hear a robot tell jokes. Like I just can't imagine humans ever doing that.
Man, well, I hope you're right. I'll have to take somebody in Silicon Valley out there to build some kind of AI that can write jokes. Then I'm out of a job for good. Yeah. I hope you're right about that, man. It's still not a good career path. It's still not a great career choice. I should have been a lawyer or something else.
Well, it's
Yeah.
changing so much because, comedians typically make a lot of their money from going on tour and doing shows. But
Yeah.
obviously now with coronavirus, that has totally, you had a show that was headlining at Zanies and it got pushed all the way to September 30th. So
Uh-huh.
how has that transition been for you?
It was tough, dude. I went from doing something, every night of the week for 5 years to not being able to do it for 2 months. And, the big comedians that they've been doing it every night for years too. So we were all
Hmm.
just, all of a sudden, every comedian in America was just stuck at their house with nothing to do. I've been pretty lucky just because the South, where I live, has been handling coronavirus a little differently than
Hmm.
the rest of the country. Comedy clubs have been open. So the last 4 weeks, I've been working doing live comedy. So I was off for about 3 months, and then I've been back for the past month, and it's been great.
Oh,
It's been
nice.
it's been really really good, man. The people that have been coming out to shows, like they're really excited to just be out of the house. You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
a lot of the people that I talked to after the shows have been like, "This is my first time doing anything since this started." So it's been really cool.
Yeah, and that sense of relief you get from going to a comedy show is so important, especially when times are tough. And it's like when we talk about, the value of comedy in society, like you can go all the way back to caveman days where you can imagine a bunch of people, a little nomadic tribe huddled around a fire at night, and then all of a sudden they hear something rustling in the bushes and they all get really tense and they grab their spears and then a cute little bunny hops out and they all burst out laughing.
Yes.
So it's like I think some of the value is that like a release, like basically you're releasing your pressure valve that builds up throughout day to day life, but it also allows you to bond with people through that shared laughter, and it also gives you a deeper understanding of reality, and you can kind of like laugh at your own situation, laugh at the situations we find ourselves in.
Yeah, it's one of the cooler parts is of doing live comedy is you'll have a crowd of the most diverse people you can imagine. Black, white, young, old, guys in Colin Kaepernick t-shirts, guys with Trump hats, all sitting together, laughing at the same thing. I was in Huntsville, Alabama, the last weekend of May, doing stand up, and it was a very diverse crowd, and everyone was having a great time. And then I get off stage and I check my phone, and there are riots all over America.
Yeah.
It was bizarre to be on stage where all these different people are coming together laughing, and then seeing that the world was kind of falling apart. So I'm not saying stand up comedy is going to save the world, but I think there is value in that.
Oh, yeah. Well, stand-up comedy has kind of always been this bastion of free speech. Like, I used to work in Hollywood and I would go to the Comedy Store oftentimes after work and people would just say the most ridiculous, outlandish things and almost like trying to get a rise out of you. But that's
Yeah,
kind of important because it like makes you not take yourself and everything so seriously. And
exactly.
yeah, and one other thing you mentioned in your podcast was that when you started comedy, or how many years you've been doing it, that's kind of how old you are in the comedy world. So if you've been doing comedy for like 6 years, you're like a 6 year old.
Yeah.
And so I guess like I'm really curious for you both how your own comedic talent or just how you know, like act on stage and deal with the crowd and maybe deal with difficult times has evolved. And also if the crowd has changed at all, like if people are more offended than they used to be or if you haven't really seen that.
I, I've evolved so much. If I go back and look at my dude, I found a set from when I was in college at Notre Dame. Had one set filmed, If you would have asked me at the time, I would have thought, man, I was killing it. And I watched that clip recently, and it about made me throw up. It was so bad because I had been on stage like 3 times.
Hmm.
So I had no idea what I was doing. But, a few thousand sets later, like my disposition's totally different. Like I'm calmer. I'm not pacing around the stage. So all that just being comfortable just comes with time, you know.
Yeah.
And I've because I know how to write jokes better, I can talk about different stuff. Whereas when I first started doing comedy, I don't know if I'd want to tackle a race joke.
Right. Right.
Just being a white guy with a beard, I wouldn't want to do that. Now I know how to do it. Now I know how to tap dance through the laser beams. You know,
Yeah.
the crowds I haven't noticed too much of a difference. I've only been doing it, seriously for a little over 5 years now, and they're, it's probably a little different in a lot of places. I've heard in New York and L.A.
Hmm.
things are different than they were even that long ago. But in the South and kind of where I perform most of the time, I haven't noticed too much of a difference, which is good.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's not. If you were only on Twitter, and I've only been on Twitter since the quarantine started, then I would think that everybody's waiting to get offended and everybody's super uptight, and it's just not the case in my experience. If you go out to a club, and then most of the time they're willing to have fun and they're willing to laugh about stuff.
Right. Yeah. Twitter is not the real world. It's important to
No.
remember that. And Facebook's not the real world either. It's kind of interesting how Twitter's kind of becoming the platform of the left and Facebook's kind of becoming the platform of the right.
Yeah, isn't that bizarre?
Really weird. Yeah.
Yeah, none of them are representative of the real world at all. I mean, especially, I'm not on Facebook too much, but Twitter, I remember looking up I was like, how many people are actually on Twitter? And the amount of people that are actually on it and active on it is such a small fraction of the country that it's like, why is activity on Twitter driving what the news talks about, what TV chooses, it's crazy.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I saw like this Fox News clip where they were like they're talking about, the TikTok teens and fans of the group K-pop bought tickets to Trump's rally. It's like like they don't even know what K-pop is. They're like the group K-pop. And like that's what happens when the news is literally just like translating what happens on Twitter for their audience. And yeah, Twitter kind of is like the ground zero for a lot of news nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah, it's too bad.
Yeah.
It's a real, dude, I think I saw a great tweet the other day. It was like, it's almost like locking the country up and telling everybody to spend their time on social media has been bad for people's health, which it absolutely has. I mean, Twitter is a cesspool of negativity and toxicity, and I hate it, but I keep looking at it.
Yeah, it's my most used app as well.
Yeah, do you hate it as much as I do, or do you have a good time on there?
Well, I'll tell you, I used to find it a lot more enjoyable, but even some of the people that I really respect and have respected have started to get more into the whole, identity politics and tearing people down. And so it has been like I've noticed a change not only among like, accounts that I haven't followed, but even with the accounts that I've been following for a long time. So it does seem like things are ramping up, and at least on Twitter, people are getting more and more offended, and people are getting more and more attached to their identity rather than just what would be good for, for all people, all humans. And, obviously there's been a lot of pretty high profile cancellations with, cancel culture. And, first of all, I'd like to say that there is a good side to cancel culture, which is that people in power are now actually having to answer for some of the deeds that they've done that are definitely not okay. There's also the bad side where, I don't know if you saw this on Twitter, but, there was that biker, cyclist who went up to those kids who were putting up like George Floyd posters, and he ripped it out of their hands. And then Twitter did what Twitter does best, and they investigated the internet and found some, bike path that this guy had taken. And so Andy's a cop. And so they outed this guy, and everyone piled on him and basically like ruined his life. And then it turns out that wasn't even the guy, it was some other guy.
Oh my gosh, I didn't see that.
Yeah, so yeah, because hardly anyone sees the follow up, right? Of like, oh, was
Yeah.
it actually the guy? It turned out to be someone else, and this guy just got his whole reputation ruined. So there is, there is something to be said for due process.
Yeah, absolutely. The first half of that story, the video made me laugh because the guy had on biker shoes and they made a funny noise when he walked. And
Right.
I'll admit I had a laugh at his expense, but I mean, God, I would never want. Oh my God! So a random guy just got doxxed online, and everybody was trashing him.
Yeah,
Man,
because there was some like shared biking app where you can see people's paths. So they like found that this guy, he actually did go on that path that day, but so did a lot of other bikers.
oh man, that's sad, but that's also pretty funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, and but from a comedy perspective, it's the only thing that alarms me is when people start getting in trouble for jokes.
Mm.
Getting in trouble and getting canceled for behavior is one thing,
Right, right.
but when people get in trouble or get canceled or get attacked for jokes, that's when I start to get concerned.
I
You know,
completely agree. Yeah, I mean, the most recent cancellation was Chris D'Elia, and but what he did seem pretty bad, if in fact it all happened, which it seems like it did. But it's totally different from, like you said, saying a joke and getting canceled for a joke that maybe just didn't hit right or didn't have enough. It wasn't funny enough for how offensive it was,
yeah,
perhaps. And
yeah,
like, there's a couple examples that are interesting to point out. So, for instance, like Michelle Wolf when she hosted the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and she made that joke about Sarah Sanders. She said, I actually really like Sarah. I think she's very resourceful, but she burns facts and then uses the ash to create a perfect smoky eye. Like, I thought that was a funny joke,
yeah,
but then she got demolished because, it was commenting on another woman's appearance, which, can definitely be offensive. But I guess like for me personally, I'm such a believer in free speech that
hmm
really like conversation is all we have to move society forward and find common ground. That if
yeah,
we can't say funny jokes or even jokes that aren't funny,
yeah.
then that's a bad path we're going down.
Yeah, that's funny you brought that up because I feel like the left pretty unfairly people say that they're the ones who are responsible for cancel culture, but it goes on the right too, and that's a perfect example of that. There's a great quote from Patrice O'Neill, who said, "Funny and unfunny come from the same place." So,
Hmm.
so we need to fight for the attempt. We need to allow people to be funny or not funny because it's all with the same intention. If you're trying to be, sometimes you're not funny, you know.
Right. Well,
But
here's another interesting quote right along that. So
yeah,
Mel Brooks said, "Tragedy is when I cut my finger. Comedy is when you walk into an open sewer and die." So it's like, yeah, if you're the butt of the joke, it can obviously seem much more offensive than if it's about someone else.
yes, yes. And then there's also a level of just being an adult. What, somebody made a joke about you? It's like, relax,
Yeah.
you know. Now things can be genuinely hurtful, but there is a level of like, dude, you're a grown adult, and somebody made a joke about you. Relax a little bit,
Yeah. It
you
does
know.
seem like certain areas, though, are just no longer, it's like the third rail. You can't even touch it. And especially with race now, it's like anything that has to do with race is really touchy. And, for instance, there was, Shane Gillis got fired from SNL for some tweets about Asian people. And, like, yeah, they were offensive, but they're also, jokes. They were meant as jokes, and maybe they weren't great jokes. But and I don't have any particular attachment to that example.
Yeah.
There's obviously a lot of other examples. Like there was Kevin Hart and Chappelle got flack for using homophobic language. Kathy Griffin cut off the Trump head. and that was seen as like very much not okay.
Yeah.
So there's so many comedians that have been canceled, and it does kind of seem like comedians to some extent are held to a higher standard than like a lot of other or maybe they just say so many things that it makes them an
Yes.
easy target.
No, they are held to a different standard, and it's bizarre. Maybe
Right.
because the illusion of it's just a guy talking. You
Hmm.
know, if people understood the process better and knew all that goes into make writing jokes and the performance of it, then maybe people would give them a little more leeway. But that's like
Right.
the give and take. If you're really good at stand-up comedy, there's the illusion of it's just a guy up there talking to you, just talking on what's on his mind. You know,
Right. Right. Yeah, a lot of work goes
maybe
into it.
that's part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, they had that interesting case just a day or two ago where, Devin Nunes, uh, senior official in the Trump administration, sued this Twitter parody account about like Devin Nunes is a cow, and they just made a bunch of cow jokes about him. And he was claiming that it's defamatory,
Wow.
it's created grievous harm to me and my family and my reputation. And thankfully, that lawsuit failed. It did not, the judge ruled that it was free speech. But it is a little, it is a little bit worrying that it does seem like there are some challenges to free speech, even when it's just made to be humorous.
Yeah.
And
The good news for in my experience is this stuff rarely trickles over into the real world. Like all the outrage that's on Twitter and social media, it's like that those people don't show up to a comedy club.
hmm,
And I've seen a lot of comedy shows. I've never seen somebody stand up and object to the
right.
content of the joke. And maybe I've just been lucky. Maybe that's going on places, but I haven't seen it. Now some people have been upset and they're nice enough to talk to the comics after the show. But if I was on Twitter, I would think that the comedy clubs are a war zone right now. And thankfully they're not yet. I hope it stays that way.
Right, right. Yeah. I'm curious if you have. So I've heard this other opinion that there's about 30% of people that have no sense of humor at all. Just like how there's a lot of people who don't enjoy fine wine or aren't good at math or aren't good in social situations. In your experience, is that largely true?
30% seems pretty high.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people. I don't know. I mean, there are definitely some people that that don't have a sense of humor. They're not willing to laugh. You have to be a willing participant, I feel like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
in
Kind of like
order to.
hypnosis.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good analogy. Like you have to go into it thinking I am a willing participant in this comedy show, or
Yeah.
I want to laugh a little bit. If you go in arms crossed and choose not to laugh, then you
Right.
probably won't. But 30% is, man, that's a lot.
Well, that's why I love when comedians will like make fun of someone who's in the front row, like got just like a serious face on, and
Yeah, when that happens, by the way, that's because it hurts seeing people like that up there.
yeah,
That comes if you're looking out when you're on stage and looking out into the crowd. Like most of the time, the lights are off in a comedy club, so you only see a few people. And if one of the people you see has their arms crossed, it kind of hurts. You're like, oh,
yeah,
it's this guy's problem. Just
yeah.
lay on him.
And what do you do if you get into a situation where like a joke bombs and no one laughs? Like I've heard so many stories of comedians saying like, oh, like anything I face in life, like dude, I've bombed in front of thousands of people, like nothing can faze me now. So like, have you noticed that you're able to better handle other situations in life, and also how do you deal with those tough situations on stage?
It's all about perspective. Like when I first started doing comedy, if I bombed, which happened a lot, it would ruin my week
Hmm.
because one of the 10 shows I'd ever done went awful. That's a pretty terrible percentage, But then you just keep doing shows and you realize that these shows aren't that important.
Hmm.
It's like taking a step back and looking at it from a wide angle. They just don't matter that much. If I have a bad set now, which still happens all the time, I'm upset about it for about 15 minutes, and then I'm ready to move on because I have another show coming up.
Yeah.
So thinking about it like that, if I'm upset about something in the real world, then I just go, you know what, tomorrow's another day,
Mhm.
and let's just move on from it. So it has helped me a little bit in that respect.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
Hmm.
Um, awesome. So I have a couple like rapid fire questions
Oh yeah, go ahead.
that, okay, so one of them is, who is your comedic hero, or who has really inspired you to become a stand-up comic?
Two guys, Bill Burr, who is probably the greatest stand-up comic of all time, and another guy, Nate Bargatze, who's another great stand-up comic, who's clean,
Oh,
who
I
has.
don't know, Nate.
Nate is really good, man. He's got a Netflix special. Um, he's clean, but you could watch his whole special and not even realize he's clean because it's just so funny. And those are the two guys. That's my, if Mount Rushmore were only two people, that would be, that'd be
Yeah,
who
I
they.
love Bill Burr.
Burr's
Uh,
great.
yeah. So what advice would you give to someone who's just starting out in stand-up comedy?
To get on stage as often as possible, to just do it as much as you can. Stand up comedy specifically is unlike any other thing I know of, in that you can only practice it by doing it in front of people. You never know if something is going to be funny until you say it out loud. And that ties into what we've been talking about of fighting for the attempt to be funny. It's just you never know until you say it out loud. So
Yeah,
just do it as often as you can. Get up on stage wherever, whenever you can. Good shows, bad shows, they're all gonna benefit you in the long run.
yeah. I've heard there's this interesting psychological phenomenon where if a comedian tells 10 jokes and only one of them is funny, or you only think one of them's funny, you're going to remember the funny joke. You typically don't remember jokes that you didn't laugh at. So you might as well say, as many jokes and types of jokes, and as long as at least one of them really resonates with each person in the crowd, then, they'll think of the show as having been funny.
Ah, that's a great point. I hadn't heard that. Yeah. Yeah, and then your job as a comedian is to keep that one funny joke and then work on the other nine, and
Right.
then ideally you have 10 out of 10 that are great,
Yeah.
but you never know until you say it out loud. You never know. You can tell yourself things are funny. You can stand in front of the mirror. You can make yourself laugh, but until you make a group of strangers laugh, you have no idea.
Right.
Hmm.
Okay, I have some questions that are unrelated to comedy, but they're questions that I ask a lot of my guests that are just sort of far future questions that I'm really interested just what people's thoughts are on them. So, okay, here's the first one. Will humans still be around 1,000 years from now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Not as many, but I think we'll persevere.
Do you think we'll colonize the stars?
Not
Like,
to start. You can't live on a. Come on, dude. You
right.
can't live on a star, dude. Stars far too hot. I know that much. Now we'll be on Mars by then for sure, though.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
Will the United States still be united 100 years from now?
100 years from now. Yeah, I think so. I think we got a couple. We got about a couple 100 years left. Things implode.
Nice.
Maybe that's optimistic. I think we got maybe 100, maybe 140 years before we're all one government in the world. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, Alan Watts has this interesting thing about how, eventually there will be the singularity, like through AI, all humans will merge into one. And by the way, that's already happened. That's what the cells in your body have already decided to do. Okay,
That's yeah.
here's the next one.
Okay.
What technological advancement are you most excited about humanity possibly achieving in the future?
Oh, already been achieved, which is self-driving cars. I can't think of another invention that's already in the works, already been made, that's going to change American life as profoundly as a self-driving car. Mostly just my life. It would change my life. Now it's going to be a while before I can afford one, so it's going to be really annoying when everybody else has one and I don't have one. But when I do, it'd be great.
Yeah. No, I'm a big fan of self-driving too.
Have you ridden one of those before? You ridden in a Tesla?
I've ridden in a Tesla, but they wasn't in full autopilot mode.
Man,
But
I watched
yeah,
it looked amazing.
yeah, I have like my grandma gave me her car, like, a 2007 Honda Accord, and my plan is to just ride that out until we're fully self-driving.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, what is the single biggest threat to human civilization in your view?
Oh my God. I mean, what's the correct date? Probably climate change. I
Yeah,
hear a lot of smart people talk. I know nothing about it, but I hear smart people talking about it, so it's got to be a real thing, right?
yeah.
I mean, thankfully, not in my lifetime. Sucks to be the future. I'll survive, but
Right.
yeah, I mean, dude, everything. I mean, I'm not super into all that stuff, but what I've seen about it, it looks like that's going to be the number one problem, right?
Hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Will machines become smarter than the average person, i.e., artificial general intelligence, by the year 2050?
Oh, probably quicker than that.
Yeah. What would you
So,
put it at if you had to put a number?
2022. How
Oh
close
man.
are we? Pretty close.
Well, we're already better than machines are already better than humans at a lot of tasks, so it's
Oh,
really just about, putting them all together. So
mm.
like in like a Siri or Alexa kind of version.
Yeah. Well, like you said, when they start writing jokes, let me know. That's what I'm tapping out.
All right. Related question to that.
Yeah.
When machines become smarter than the average person in 2022, will consciousness emerge? Or at some point, will consciousness emerge in machines once they've reached a sufficient level of complex intelligence? Or maybe they already are somewhat conscious.
I'm just so not equipped to answer that. Dude, you really made me like just talking to you is like, man, I forgot how dumb I was. Yeah, I haven't had like an intellectual conversation in a long time, and like I'm really out of my league here. Yeah, I think so, man. That's my answer.
Yeah. No, I mean, honestly, that's kind of what I think. It's like,
Yeah.
it's hard to draw a line at where consciousness emerges. So I kind of believe that even a rock to some extent has some low level of conscious resonance.
Oh my gosh. I'm so out of my. It just say I thought I was doing well up until that question. I was like, man, about to be exposed here.
All right, I've
Yeah.
just got.
By the way, I did not graduate. I did not graduate from Notre Dame with honors. No, I was not. Don't let my answers reflect the what you think about Mattimore's education. We did go to the same college, but with two vastly different students here.
Yeah, we're getting lots of different takes. They're all valuable.
Yeah.
All right, so here I have two more rapid fires, and then we'll get into the future scenarios.
Okay.
So one is, if you were elected president, what would you do on day one? Like, what's the one policy you would enact first?
Oh wow. Look, I think there's a good argument to be made to decriminalize or legalize marijuana and get all those people out of prison.
Yeah.
I think that there's a good argument to do that on day one. People always talk about day one of the
Right.
president. It's like everybody's like, I'm going to do a million different things on day one. It's like, maybe, I don't know, maybe day three, I'll get down to some good stuff.
Yeah, day one, you got to celebrate a little, give some
Yeah, that
speeches.
day is real busy, dude. You got to get sworn in. There's a ball.
Yeah. All right, last rapid fire.
Yeah.
Should we bring back the Tyrannosaurus Rex?
Bring it back.
Yeah, with gene technology.
Oh, God.
Assuming we're able to, and we are close to being able to.
Really?
Yeah, I mean,
That's,
we're
yeah.
already about able to bring back a woolly mammoth or almost there.
I don't think so because I think if you bring one back, you got to bring two back, right? and then they start breeding, and then we have a problem.
Yeah.
Because it's inhumane and cruel to just bring one back, right? You bring one T-Rex back, it's just in a big enclosure. It has no quality of life. You're like, let's give it a mate. And then they start having kids. The kids start having kids with each other. Next thing you know, the world's over. So I think maybe just let's not bring any of them back.
Yeah. That's valid. All right. Let's take a quick break and then let's get into the future scenarios. All right, Aaron,
Yep.
in your mind, what is the worst case scenario for the future of comedy?
Worst case scenario.
That people won't want to come see live comedy anymore. I think that's a very real concern. Just with it becomes easier and easier to consume comedy on your phone, on TV, just to stream it. So people won't want to come see it live, and that would be worst case scenario for me. So hopefully people come out. It's so much better. It's one of those things that's just so much better live. I know people talk about music that way.
Mm-hmm.
Where you got to see them live, but it really is a totally different experience to see comedy.
Yeah.
When a guy is 6 feet away from you,
Right. Well, they did an interesting study with music where they found that everyone's hearts are beating in sync when there's a DJ playing in a set. And really, it's like your whole, like all the electromagnetic fields of energy of all the people are really synchronized. So you can really like feel that. And it's sort of a similar thing with comedy where everyone has the same sort of energy, especially when a really good joke, is told and then everyone releases at the same time. And it's this like endorphins rush your brain. And you don't get that to the same extent if you're just, alone sitting in your kitchen listening or watching a Netflix special.
Exactly. And I've seen a lot of that because during the quarantine, I did some shows over Zoom,
Yeah.
and it's just not the same. It really proved to me that there's something about being in the same room,
Yeah.
a bunch of strangers in there, and doing a live show that's really special. So hopefully that doesn't go away.
Totally.
Yeah.
All right. What is, in your mind, the best case scenario for the future of comedy?
Best case scenario.
Best case scenario is comedians are given the freedom to make jokes about anything, which I think they already have, but just continuing to have that freedom, that all different kinds of people have opportunities to do comedy. That, dude, I would love. There's only a handful of arena acts in comedy right now. There's only about a handful of comics that can sell out big arenas, and it would be really cool. Not that comedy's better in an arena, but I would love for there to just be more comedians who could do that if they wanted to.
Yeah.
And comedians just became more of a respected art form. Kind of all over the place here, but
No, I like that.
yeah, I would love for there to be, because there are so many good comedians, and I would love if they were bigger and could were more appreciated.
Yeah.
Not even talking about me. I just know so many. It's like there are only 3 or 4 super famous comedians right now. It's like Kevin Hart, Amy Schumer, Rogan, Chappelle. Like that's about. I mean, a couple others, I'm sure, but there are so many more than that.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know.
Yeah, it seems like the more challenges we face in society, the more we need that comedic release too. So I hope you're right.
Yeah, me too.
All right. What is the most likely scenario? How do you think comedy is going to change in the next several years?
Most likely scenario.
I think I think the acts, like the you already see it now. Comedy clubs are like Twitch streamers are performing there, and podcasters are performing at comedy clubs. Just, the type of comedy that's being consumed is different. So you're going to see different types of acts performing live, and maybe the archetype of a conventional stand-up comic kind of fades away. And maybe I'm getting back into my worst case scenario, but I could envision a world where that happens, where a conventional stand-up comic is like a blacksmith, kind of just just at Renaissance fairs and stuff, Look, I think I was really, really worried about how things would be different after coronavirus. Like, I wasn't sure if A, people were going to come to shows, and B, if they were going to be super weird at shows. Mm-hmm. And, I've only been back for about a month. I've done 4 different weekends since coronavirus. And luckily there just wasn't much of a change. Like, people were still, they're happy to be out. They were still laughing at the same stuff. Like, they hadn't, if anything, they wanted to get back to how they were before all of this. So
that's really good to hear.
Yeah. And it was really good to see, because I was pretty pessimistic about the whole thing a few months ago.
Yeah.
I thought America's sense of humor will have changed after this, and thankfully it hasn't.
Right.
And we'll see. Things could get much worse.
But now, I've heard that, what makes something funny is a benign violation. So if you think of 2 concentric circles of something that's benign and something that's a violation, whatever's in the middle of those is what's like a funny joke. And so I guess, like, for my own best, worst, and most likely scenario, it would be that what's benign doesn't shrink and shrink and shrink, where we get more and more offended. So what's acceptable to be told as a joke gets smaller and smaller, and what's a violation gets bigger and bigger. So I would hope that, at least either we stay where we are right now, where you can pretty much say whatever, or maybe it even grows where people are less and less offended over time. So there's an even wider scope of what you can say, and it's not perceived as being like, something cancelable or something like,
That's really profound.
Because, like they said, so for instance, like, you can't tickle yourself because there's no violation there. Like, you're not going to, like, actually, like, hurt, whatever.
Yeah.
But so there needs to be some sort of, like, almost like a level of threat or danger. And it's kind of like someone else said this interesting thing that unless you're going right up to the line of what's acceptable, whether it's an idea or a joke or whatever, then what you're saying is probably pretty bland and it's not really that useful. Like, I can say, like, water is great, but no one's going to laugh at that. Like, you have to say something that's a little bit on the edge in order for it even to be a valuable thing to say. So I hope that edge doesn't recede.
Yeah, and you don't know where that line is until you cross it a little bit.
Yeah, you need the freedom to figure out where that line is. And maybe you go over once and then you realize you went too far, and you should have the ability to come back and do another set and, get it better the next time.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I'm going to steal that.
Dude, be my guest, yeah. Hey, thank you so much for joining me and all of our listeners.
Hey, dude, thank you, man. I appreciate it. I had fun.
The past, the present, and the future.
Our computer is picking up a strange signal.
The past, the present, and the future, baby.
What's the world coming to?
The past, the present, and the future.